Good afternoon and welcome to the Qatar-America Institute. I am Diana Untermeyer, Cultural Advisor to QAI. When my husband Chase became the U.S. Ambassador to Qatar in 2004, the Wyoming dryland rancher in me resonated with the desert culture in Qatar, and it has become my second home. On behalf of QIA Executive Director Paul Hamill and his able team, I invite you to join us frequently for discussions and debate, and on a lighter side, for Qatari food and movie nights. QAI's mission is to encourage dialogue, research, and understanding between Qatar and the United States. And while we are in QAI's headquarters today, our programs extend across America and Qatar, including people-to-people exchanges, academic research, and cultural programs designed to build meaningful relationships between our two nations. We are delighted to feature Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Thani, founding director of the new Institute of Arab and Islamic Art in New York City. IAIA burst onto the art scene last spring and has garnered enthusiastic international reviews for its cross-cultural mission, exhibitions, and programming, most notably and recently in the New York Times, which is a very hard nut to crack. Prior to founding IAIA, Sheikh Mohammed graduated from the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service in Doha and worked at the United Nations. However, his passion for art led him to earn his master's degree from the University of London Institute in Paris, writing his thesis on Cézanne and the advent of Fauvism and Cubism. Sheikh Mohammed founded IAIA to fill a hole in the rich fabric of New York's art scene by providing a place for Arab and Muslim artistic voices to tell their own stories. Acting as a private citizen, he recruited a prestigious board, raised funds, and changed the conversation in New York and beyond, a remarkable accomplishment indeed. Whether art is or should be political has long been debated. Art may not be political with a capital P, as in the Indira Gandhi definition, politics is the art of acquiring, holding, and wielding power. Nonetheless, art is political in its ability to make sharp commentary, elicit strong reactions, and express the full range of human emotion. Sheikh Mohammed, thank you for joining us today. We look forward to hearing your perspective and opening the floor to audience questions afterwards. Sheikh Mohammed.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you. And it's really a great honor to be with so many great people here in this room today. Can we start with the first slide? Often when we think of art, we think of the visual, and perhaps one of the first impressions that one might get from an image like this, that this is beautiful or this is overwhelming. But what's incredible is that art tells a story that is much more than just the visual. And visual art, whether in the form of design, architecture, or even painting, is always associated with aesthetics. And aesthetics is always a product of a certain environment or a certain society and a culture. And those societies allow for the different forms and the different productions of art. Art has always been thriving through cultural exchange. And cultural exchange happens in different forms. And throughout the Islamic world and the Arab world, one of the main forms of cultural exchange happened through merchants and through trade. And so the Silk Route had such a great way in which it introduced so many different forms of the Islamic culture to the East. And for example, when we see this image here, this calligraphy is called Sini. And Sini is an Arabic Chinese calligraphy used for over 1,200 years in China. When Arab merchants and Muslim merchants came to China and introduced the Quran and Arabic scripture, the Chinese decided that they're not going to go with what they have got their hands on through the Arab merchants, but they decided to create a completely new interpretation of Arabic calligraphy, which is called Sini. And here we really see how this beautiful marriage between two different cultures assists in a new form of expression, a new form of art. A lot of people think that because Islam requires you not to use figurative works, that Arabic calligraphy is a reaction of that. But if we go to the next slide, we see that we have two similar scriptures here. On the left, we have the Kufic scripture, which was used as the main form of calligraphy style by the Abbasid Empire in the 8th century. When Kufic scripture eventually reached to Morocco, the people decided that the style of calligraphy does not reflect their societies. And so they decided that, wait, we probably need to insert our experiences and our way of living into this style. So we see that it becomes much more lenient, there's so much more curve, and there's so much of the existing Amazigh culture, which was native to modern-day Morocco, in this very scripture. So again, this is another example of how cultural exchange will be able to open people's eye further into the different forms of artistic style and push the boundaries to produce a new aesthetics and new techniques in approaching certain works. Another great form of cultural exchange is, the next slide please, is architecture. The cultural exchange between two monotheistic religions have the fruits of one of the magnificent Islamic monuments, which is the Dome of the Rock that we see on the far left. And the Dome of the Rock was commissioned by the Umayyad Khalifa Abdul Malik bin Marwan and his son in 1687. Although we have more than 1.3 billion people that have strong religious affiliation with this beautiful Islamic monument, people don't know that the Dome of the Rock follows a purely Byzantine style in structure and in mosaic. In fact, in this image on the right, we see the dome of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the dome differs by one diameter between the Dome of the Rock and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So here we see as well how sometimes you don't need to challenge what already exists in a certain city or a certain culture, but see how we can elevate it. And so what happens is that we see finally in the Dome of the Rock a non-figurative motif that cover the indoor and outdoor of the Dome of the Rock, including the use of calligraphy, not for primary resources, but as well as a form of art. And this really paves its way to what we call today Islamic art. And we see how that really feeds as well into contemporary art practice. The beauty of cultural exchange in the form of art is that it really relies heavily on people's emotions and people's experiences. It's one thing to read about something, but to be able to confront certain forms of art is for you to be able to look beyond what you have assumed for a while. So it as well helps in breaking certain stereotypes. It was very important when I moved to New York to experience the true native New York day-to-day lives. And I realized that you have tons of students at the best schools in New York. You have a lot of courses that are being taught in different cultural organizations. And you have people that visit from across the world, but as well visit all from across the US. And one thing they do is that they really look at New York as this melting point for different cultures. And if I have an interest in Jewish contemporary art or even Jewish antiquity, I could go to the Jewish Museum and I will be able to have a great experience. You have the Swiss Institute, which as well provides a different perspective on the Swiss contemporary art. You have the Asia Society, and you have the Latin American Museum. And so every culture, every civilization is represented, except the Arab and Islamic in terms of contemporary, because the Met hosts one of the most beautiful Islamic antiquity. But we have to take into consideration that people want to know what is the society in Lebanon or in Turkey or in Malaysia, what are they producing today? How can we connect to them in the 21st century? And so it was very important for us to develop an institute that focuses on contemporary art, that will have a platform for academics, for writers, for curators, for artists to give talks, to invite students. We had example of bringing students in from Chapin. We had the Rhode Island School of Design and faculty come by. And so for them to experience the exhibition space is one thing, but then to go through the bookstore and through the titles and to be able to really have a different outlook to the Arab and Islamic world. We live in a challenging environment where the media continues to alienate Arabs and Muslims, and it's very easy for us to blame the media, but we have to be active participants of the society and of the global world, and we have to create a platform where we are able to share our own stories. And this is really when I decided that the Institute of Arab Islamic Art had to take form in New York. We are an independent nonprofit that promotes the cross-cultural dialogue and understanding between New York City, the US, and the Arab and Islamic world. And one thing that people ask me is, why do you call it the Institute of Arab and Islamic Art? Why don't you use other terms and titles that other cultural organizations use, for example, the Near East or the Middle East? The problem with the Middle East is that it's a purely colonial term that was found in the 1850s in the British India office. And then in 1902, the naval strategist Alfred Mayer, he used it to describe the area that exists between India and the Arab world. But if we are looking as well at a certain historical context, what does it mean if I say Middle East art? Then it doesn't exist until the early 20th century. So it becomes very problematic. Not only that, but we chose Arab and Islamic because we wanted to quash certain stereotypes that people think all Arabs are Muslims, and it's not true. You have Arab Jews and Arab Christians that are active participants of both the Arab and the Islamic society. And well, if we just said Islamic art, then we have to take into consideration that the Arab community is a majority within the Muslim world. 70% of the Islamic world is scattered across Asia. So we really wanted to focus on a term that best represents, that is fair to the people that share the experiences across the Islamic world. And this was really one of the reasons that inspired our first exhibition. And we looked at four female artists' relationship to Islamic architecture and geometry, and how that traditional form of art in Islam seeps into contemporary practice. So we chose four female artists that come from different geographical areas of the Islamic world. We have Diana Untermeyer, which is Palestinian, she's Palestinian Saudi. We have Munir Farman, and Munir is Iranian. And then you have Zarina Hashmi and Nisreen Mohammadi, who's Pakistani Indian. And that in itself shares the story that when you live in an Islamic culture or an Islamic community, it doesn't matter if you're in Indonesia, it doesn't matter if you are in south of Spain, it doesn't matter if you are in Egypt, because the essence of the Islamic civilization is captured through architecture. And when architecture is present, you will realize that your experiences to a Muslim that is 1,000 miles away is very similar to yours. But then what makes cultural exchange incredible is that you see the detail within the Islamic world. If you look at two buildings or two mosques, one in Agra and the other in Egypt, they might look alike, but the detail is very specific to the certain movements. So the Fatimid art, they've had some certain details in terms of their tiling and mosaic, whereas the Agra really focused on pushing the boundaries of construction. And with that, really, we chose those four artists. We focused on works on paper as opposed to sculptures, because we wanted to break away from what people consider decorative art. If we go to the second, the next one, please. Here we have as well another beautiful conversation that comes out from this exhibition, that yes, we're looking at the essence of Islamic civilization, but how has Islamic civilization contributed to certain artistic movements? On the right, we have Munir Farman, and this work was part of Exhibition 1. And on the left, we have Mondrian's work. And Mondrian was one of the founders of geometric abstraction. And geometric abstraction was this movement that happened in the 20th century that finally Western artists were able to no longer focus on figurative art, but rather look at a completely new form of abstraction, which is geometry. And you see how looking at Islamic geometry gives you the ability to look beyond what one sees and creates a complex web of deconstructions, because you can look at a purely geometrical Islamic star, but once you deconstruct it, this is once you're able to reduce this art and create a completely new vocabulary. The other example we have is in the next slide. On the left, we have Nisreen Mohammadi, and Nisreen was part of Exhibition 1 as well. And Nisreen, being in India, having the experience of Islamic architecture, she was more concerned in deconstructing both her experiences and deconstructing the actual lines that make up geometry in a building. And that led her to a Western movement called constructivism, which was found in the early 20th century in Russia. And on the right, we have a very important work of constructivist movement. And we see how there's a conversation there. And this movement really focused on the evolution of architecture and industrialism. And the artists were really concerned with what was happening back then. And that was really their approach of talking about the socio-economical situation that was happening during that time. But we realized that architecture is something that all people share common, regardless of the aesthetics. It's the essence of geometry exists in all buildings. And this is really where we see so much artistic practice emerge in the West that really speaks to the Islamic world. People even argue that Cubism, Picasso at some point, not only looking at how Cézanne abstracted the face or the nose, but that this form of Islamic geometry, the shapes, the very complex lines that are developed, that really finally seeped its way to 20th century movements in Europe. And we are hoping at the Institute to we might have accomplished something very small so far, and we might have gotten students and people in, but our aim is how will the Institute of Arab and Islamic Art and other cultural institutions have an impact in the next 10 years. When we have artists that live in New York, whether in Harlem or Brooklyn or Lower East Side, when they come to our space and when they look at artists from the region, what kind of conversations emerge, and how will looking at contemporary Arab and Islamic art impact their work to come? And as well, we want to be able to shed the light on the similarities that different cultures go through. And we want to break the stereotype by not necessarily showcasing what is purely Islamic or purely Arabic, but as well showing conceptual art that speaks beyond just the visual and gets people interested in the Arab and Islamic world. And we hope that larger American institutions challenge their own programming and challenge their audience. And this was a call as well from day one that we had to all American institutions, that we are ready to collaborate and we are ready to share our resources and share our knowledge together to bridge the gap and build something that will have an impact on young people that in future will be at a situation where they're either filling roles of academics or in politics, because art has the capability of telling a story, and art has the capability of moving people to places that they haven't imagined. And with that, I would like to end with a short video of the Institute, and I hope that I'm here to answer any questions as well.
The lines and symmetry of Islamic geometry, historically the ancient symbol of unity and diversity, often the starting point for many familiar Islamic art patterns. It's all part of the first exhibition in the newly opened Institute of Arab and Islamic Art in New York, the first cultural institution of its kind in the city dedicated only to art from the Arab world.
The layout of the artworks are intentional.
The museum's founder is Mohammed Thani, a Qatari art enthusiast who says the museum is needed to help foster better understanding at a time of rising Islamophobia.
There's a stereotype and there's misconceptions on Muslims and Arabs. And we could blame media all we want, but it's our responsibility to do something about it. And it's our responsibility to be active participants of the society.
The museum is a registered non-profit and meant to be a place for education as much as understanding, a venue for the study and appreciation of Islamic art.
And it's not just about the art on the walls. The Institute will also have a residency program that will bring artists from the Arab world that might not otherwise have the financial means here to New York to learn and showcase their work.
There will be 4 exhibitions a year. The first one a focus on Islamic architecture and geometry by 4 female artists.
I loved the space and I loved the way the show was curated.
Like Diana Untermeyer, a Saudi Palestinian artist.
Art in itself is a very important visual language because, someone said once to me that when you look back at a civilization, they're not remembered by their bankers or lawyers or businessmen, they're remembered by their arts.
And she hopes her art can leave an impression on those who see it, all through art, finally in a space dedicated only to Arab and Islamic works. Gabriel Elizondo, Al Jazeera, New York.
Thank you, everyone. No, I'm good.
If you'll join me here. Before we take questions from the audience, one thing you touched on briefly, but I think it might be important, is to talk about the supposed ban on representational art, because certainly there have been many artists from Islamic lands that have represented the human figure Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's we have to as well acknowledge that at the beginning of or the start of Islamic art, which really was the beginning with Abdul Malik bin Marwan, the Umayyad Caliphate, and the first example was the Dome of the Rock, and people always use that as example and does not acknowledge that Islamic art progressed through the different empires. And so when Islam, the Islamic culture came into contact with the Persian culture, we see that they have a strong affiliation with the figurative work. And most of the Islamic manuscripts that we see in, coming from different movements in Iran is purely figurative. Even in Samarkand, the areas of Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Chagistan, all those inhabitants of those cultures and civilizations rely heavily on figurative work. Even today, we have a young, very talented artist called Shazia Skandar, graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design. She depicts a lot of figurative elements in her work that mirror the Islamic scriptures. And at some point in Samarkand, they saw an Islamic scripture that depicted the Prophet, done by an Islamic artist and scholar. So there's really always, it depends which area of the Islamic world. You know, it goes back as well to geography. Islam exists across several continents. The more you go west, the less figurative it is. The more you go east, the more figurative it is.
Other questions from the audience?
Thank you for that fantastic talk. My question is, what has been the biggest struggle or challenge in setting up your institute or corralling artists?
I would say funding. Unfortunately, you know, this institute speaks to patrons and individuals that live across the Arab and Islamic worlds, as well as patrons that are based in the US. And part of our research as well focused on a lot of the patrons and the foundations that give grant and support cultural institutions in the region. And those really exist in Saudi and the Emirates. And when I started at the very beginning, there was a lot of support and a lot of promise coming from people and foundations in both Saudi and the Emirates, including them sending their students. We had a group of students come from the Salama Emerging Art Fellowship in Abu Dhabi to our space, and there was talks about supporting and funding the project. But then the blockade happened, and you know, obviously impacted an entire not only country, region, but the way it impacts individuals and the way it impacted the institute was quite severe, because we're trying to share this beautiful experience of Islamic art and Arab art and contemporary art, and something that would represent the entire region. But I have, you know, I always say that this is an independent nonprofit in New York, but I'm seen as a Qatari, and you know, they've stopped any sorts of funding, and I told them we will not turn you away. This is an opportunity for everyone. When we were approached by a very young group of creative Emiratis to host their launch of Watad magazine, which is an architectural magazine based in Dubai, we said, of course. And that was back in October after the blockade. So I guess the struggle really was, you know, of course funding was a big struggle, but the blockade, frankly, you know, seeped its way to our institute and to New York, and we're paying a very big price, but we're fighting through the situation.
Sheikh Mohammed may not give this pitch, but I will. It's very easy to donate. There's a support button right on the website.
Yeah, and frankly, I'm probably the worst fundraiser as well.
As we all know, that particularly when you're going to foundations, it's having lots of donations, even if they're small, helps
Yeah,
support in the
absolutely,
raising of funds.
absolutely.
So I'll give that pitch because I know my
Thank you
friend
very much.
How about a big cocktail party?
Yeah, that would be great. We had two great galas where we received the support of the Qatari embassy, and they were very generous, and that really helped us to continue for the first quarter of 2018, and we hope that more to come. We want people to see this beyond the borders that exist in the region. Why bring the borders in New York? So we hope that will change, because that's the only way, as a Qatari, I will be able to have dialogue with my neighbors through art. And another really major problem is that as a director of this institute, I need to know what kind of artistic production is going on. And one of the largest artistic production is in Saudi and the Emirates. They have the Dubai Art Fair next month. And then we had the Jeddah Art Week a few weeks ago. But now, I'm not even aware of the kind of artistic production happening. And that obviously will have another impact.
Thank you so much for this great event. I've never come here. This is my first time, and I just live across here. So looking at your art, and I really appreciate it. We work with the global young people and Muslims, all of them in us, and they do exactly what you are doing. How could it, how can this go global, both in Africa? I come from Kenya, Africa, and other countries to bring this culture. I'm just happy the Emir was in Africa in December, and that's where the culture is all about. He didn't say this is Muslim, but through that culture and tradition makes people understand themselves, and this what is happening, terrorism and whatever, would stop from that, because people are engaged, especially young people. So thank you so much for your wonderful presentation, and I'll tell the ladies to contact you if you don't mind.
Absolutely,
Yes.
yeah, it would be a pleasure.
Elizabeth?
I also wanted to thank you for your initiative, and thank you for this talk today. You mentioned Chapin and RISD and bringing schools in. How can you really have a substantial outreach, especially with young people, because it's so important for cultural understanding and communication?
Yeah, absolutely. Chapin got in touch with us shortly after we opened our first inaugural exhibition in May, and obviously it was they got in touch end of May, and then it was summer holidays, and then the blockade happened. So they said, can we arrange to get the students to come by the Institute in fall or spring, in fall or the winter of 2017-18? And I was thinking, are we going to still exist, with all... but then they continued getting in touch. What helped as well is our public programming. What happens is that the teachers and the faculty of Chapin and other NYU and other schools and universities, they come to our public programming, and that's when they see they interact with myself or one of my colleagues and see what kind of programming that fits into their students. But it was mostly those schools and universities approaching us, and not the other way around. Another school as well in Brooklyn got in touch with us. They receive support from the Qatar Foundation International. And they as well, because they're teaching the Arabic language to the young students, and they want to see how can we continue this through art. And it's really a welcome, we welcome them, we arrange the timing that best suits their schedules, and we as well, in the future, our advisory committee as well, our idea is that they would give classes on contemporary art to the schools that need it. And this is one of the ways in which we are approaching our outreach and our programming.
Thank you.
Vanessa Neumann. I want to commend this. I think this is a tremendous initiative, tremendous project. I love the fact that it's all pan-Arab and Muslim. It's big believer in that sort of thing. My question is a bit on the technical side about the logistics of setting it up, because it's quite competitive environment in New York. What are your relationships, or have you reached out to with your liaisons with other Arab institutes or museums, right? The Islamic rooms and at the Met or other institutes, what reaction have you gotten? Have they been helpful or not? I guess is my question. It's the blunt question.
I have to be nice, so I'll try. No, they've been great. You know, MoMA is doing the first primary source book on Arab modern art, which is great, and people that know the Arab culture, with primary sources it becomes very problematic because it's a very oral culture, and so it's very rare to put your hands on primary source books. So they got in touch with us, and they were nice and generous because they wanted to share the launch with the Institute of Arab and Islamic Art for something that they've been working on for 7 years. That was great. One of our advisors is actually a curator for the contemporary Arab and Islamic art at the Met as well. At the very, very beginning, before we actually had a physical space, one of the first exhibitions that we were looking at was the evolution of Arabic calligraphy through primary source, and not through the Hurufiyya movement, which is a movement in the Arab world in the 20th century where artists use calligraphy as a form of art. But really, it goes back to the story of why the Moroccans decided to create a Kufik Maghribi. And we were in touch with the Walter Museum in Baltimore, and they were very happy to share their resources and their knowledge with us. And so there has started communication and talks with those, but I think they can be more helpful.
I know that we're in Houston, we're building a brand new building dedicated to contemporary arts, and we've recently hosted a major exhibition of contemporary arts, primarily from Persian artists. And our curator traveled to New York for your gala, and when I first heard about this, which I just asked our curator of the arts of the Islamic world, and she got in touch with Allison and said, oh, it's the hot new art space in New York. So, the word is getting out there, but there's a difference between the word getting out there and having it translated.
I'm glad they
dollars.
call us the hot space because, of course you want to, in New York, it's all about, what's hip, what's hot, where to go and what to see in terms of art. And for us to be very truthful and use something that, a title that is Arab and Islamic, and still be able to land that reputation in New York and be truthful to ourselves. That for us as well is a great accomplishment. And we were talking earlier as well about finding ways in which institutions, even like the MFA in Houston, to develop collaborations on the way. I think a lot of cultural institutions across the world, they have a very similar programming, and sometimes you have two museums working on the same exact show, and it makes sense for them to share their resources and share their knowledge and work together really to make great programming happen.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful, really interesting, and Georgetown has done a really great job in educating you. I'm from Georgetown University, so.
Georgetown shouldn't take the effort, the credit for, no, they did, no, of course it's.
Anyway, my question is, have you been in contact with the Free Air Gallery here? Because they do a lot of Islamic art, and they have amazing space, and also the people that run some of the programs are very open for new things. And second question, are you going to bring a show to DC? because
We would love to.
you will get a lot of people attending.
We would love
and,
to.
And there are so many galleries that you might be interested in speaking to.
We would love to. I just want to start by saying that Georgetown can take a bit of credit. It's great because, you know, for me to go to school in Georgetown, in Doha, and get a perspective on education that challenges our own norms was really helpful. And I thank Georgetown as well for giving me the opportunity to have a year abroad at the School of Oriental and African Study in London, which was great, and having the opportunity to come to the main campus over 4 summers and doing great courses here. We would love to have a connection with the institutions and the galleries here in DC.
Agnolo Gallery at Georgetown University, maybe.
We would love to. We would love to. You know, we
exchange cards. I'm highly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I mean, you know, we pride ourselves on curating exhibitions that are well reviewed and exhibitions that don't cost a lot of money to transport, or exhibitions that can be easily installed in different museums. And we would love a presence here in DC. And I hope, where's Paul? I hope Paul is going to facilitate introductions because we really want to work with the Qatar-America Institute, and you know, we thank them for this great opportunity. And if they are able to bridge those gaps, it would be great. You know, at the end of the day, I might be a product of Georgetown, but I'm a product of Qatar as well. And it is growing up in Qatar and seeing Her Excellency Sheikh Mayas's incredible contributions to Arab and Islamic art, and being there and seeing all this take place in such a short time gave me the courage and the ability to you know, in New York, where I really knew very, very little people, you know, get registered and have an institute running. It's because of where I come from and because of the experiences I had.
To put it in perspective, in 2006, when Sheikh Mohammed was starting his undergraduate career, the Museum of Islamic Art, we were still taking hard hat tours. And now, and the really quite remarkable Arab collection of modern and contemporary art was still housed in 3 dusty houses. And now we go on and we have these incredible purpose-built buildings, and a young Qatari who, all on his own initiative, without government support, has created this incredible institute in America.
What's amazing is that, you know, going to school in Doha and seeing all those incredible developments, you know, they worked very hard in developing a cultural infrastructure that did not rely on branding from the outside. And so, you know, when they looked at their modern and contemporary Arab collection, they called it methaf, as opposed to, you know, collaborating with a museum that is either in the Arab world or in the West. The same thing with the Islamic art. And so, you know, seeing all this happen and moving to New York as well, when it goes back to the title, you know, how can we title this? And so to see that my country were very courageous in really using titles and names for foundation that is very true to the society, empowered me really to not shy away from that, because they embraced the Arab modern art, and they embraced the Islamic culture and dedicated an entire building for that. So all those experiences really, they channel themselves through some of my small achievements.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hisham Islam, I'm retired U.S. Navy. First, thank you for inviting me here. And I represent myself, obviously. I know nothing about art. As a matter of fact, the only art I know about is the Arabic TV channel. but I really
ART.
enjoyed the way you presented things.
Thank you.
And the only comment I have, I don't have a question, it's more of a comment. The comment I have is in reference to the media and the negativity that Muslim Americans or Muslims in general receive. The important thing is the fact what you said, it's really about us. It's time to take the bull by the horn and change that image. And you were impressive today. And I hope that, I wish that my boys, they're probably the age of my boys. Whether you like it or not, you look like them. So
29.
can see you and hear you. I hope that in your programs, you're able to reach out to other Muslim Americans, in particular during your time here in the U.S., so they could learn from you. You are a great example for others.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I do believe this presentation will be up on the Qatar-America website, and I think we'll Twitter it. I think we would all like to thank you, Sheikh Mohammed, for this. And on behalf of the Qatar-America Institute, our whole purpose of existing is to be a megaphone for Qatar in America. And because the people who tell the Qataris story best are Qataris themselves, and I feel sure that not only Paul and the Institute, but other people in this room will be happy to help you facilitate relationships, and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
very,
you.
very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you for